So I'm really excited to be part of Over the Rainbow, put on by the Gossip Collective. My name's Liza, and my lockdown project was not a piece of art, it was a piece of writing, which Mary Turner Thompson, author of The Bigamist, helped me bring to fruition. So I'm going to be reading one of the last stories from my book. The book is available here, some signed copies, or you can order it directly on Amazon for Kindle or as a paperback. So here is the last story in the book, and it's called Sweet Dreams. I hope you enjoy it. Sweet Dreams. I'm sorry for your loss, Harry. He looked at the woman speaking to him through a mask. Her voice jogged him back to the present. She told him she had sat with his wife Brenda until the end. Oh, she looked kind enough. But he should have been there, not this stranger. Except to Brenda, his Bren. He already was a stranger. She had died without him. The last thing he had wanted, and he had begged, pleaded to be allowed to wear whatever contraption or layers of plastic were needed to sit with her in the last days. But the refusal had been firm. No exceptions, and everyone was very sorry. He knew he had lost her that day on the beach. He went to fetch them both an ice cream, almost 2 years before she died. By the time he came back, she had wandered away from the old wooden bench, the one they had always shared whenever they visited. He looked around, worried, but she wasn't far, just standing by the old pier, tapping on a wooden pole, tapping it like a woodpecker with her fingers instead of a beak, rhythmically. Bren, what are you doing? Harry said as the ice creams began to melt, the creamy consistency running down the cornets into his fingers. He handed her one of the 99s. Come on, eat up or it'll run away. Bren had laughed, that tinkling laugh he had first heard in the pub all those years ago. It was deeper, but it was still there. Run away, she said. Her eyes gave a hint that those words still meant something. Run away? We ran away, she repeated, becoming more excited. He nodded, taking her arm and pulling her into him. He guided her back to the bench. Yes, Bren, that we did, my darling, that we did. He patted her arm as they ate their cornets in silence and thought about the first night he had set eyes on her, travelling down the lane of memories they each held of the past 60 years. His were clear, hers less so. Like tendrils of mist, they came and went. The pub had been dark and noisy when Harry arrived. As he pushed his way to the bar, tripping awkwardly over someone's foot, he almost knocked the glass of beer out of her hand. Sorry, he had said absently. 2 left feet, is it? Bren had retorted, winking at her friend. She was wearing a lilac dress with tiny white flowers, and he was still in naval uniform. He had no idea then that the petite brunette was an air transport auxiliaire, an ATA pilot who flew some of the biggest planes from one side of the country to the other, doing her part for the war effort. She had teased him later, when he presumed she was a girly girl. They had thought nothing of what they saw during those war years could be worse. But it turned out they were wrong. Bren's illness, her dementia, had robbed them of so much during the last 5 years of their lives together. Her empty mind reminded him of the street of houses where their friends had lived, a decimated cavity where once life and laughter had been. There had been very few moments of lucidity over the past months, an occasional memory triggered by a smell or a word or a touch, or one of the stories he had read to her, or when they listened to music. But that day on the beach, that was the last real day they had spent together as husband and wife, as Bren and Harry, before she went to live somewhere else. He cursed himself again for making the choice to have her move into the care home, where he could not be with her. Would she have made that choice if it had been the other way around? He had driven himself mad with second-guessing. The decision was made after she had wandered away one night. She had walked for miles in her nightdress and slippers, and he and Roger had found her freezing cold at the edge of the canal, sitting on the grass. She was singing one of the old songs, one of the songs they used to sing together. "Dad, you can't go on like this." His son Roger had been angry about being woken up in the middle of the night to help Harry look for her. "Susan and I have talked about it. Mum needs to be somewhere where there are trained people who can look after her. None of us are getting any younger." Harry, aged 95, was still upright, shrewd, optimistic, and thankful for every moment he had. Roger, at 59, seemed to Harry like a grumpy old man. Roger and Susan, their beloved children, had turned out well enough, but they lived busy lives, filled with consumerism and holidays abroad. There was little time left for their parents, or, it often seemed to Harry, their own children and new grandchild. Bren had been thrilled when she learned she was going to be a great-grandma. It was a cruel twist of fate that, as the pregnancy came to term, her illness meant she had little capacity to know her own granddaughter, let alone who the new baby was. But of course none of them could have seen that a pandemic would make the care home a prison for Bren. For over 60 years, Bren and Harry had only been parted for the 2 remaining years of the war. They ran away to get married in 1943, 2 days after they met. They kept their nuptials secret until 1945. Neither of their families would have objected to their match, but organising a wedding and getting permissions would have taken too much time. Harry was due back from leave. And they hadn't once regretted the spontaneous decision or the lack of formal celebrations. Although Brenda's mother insisted on a double family gathering as soon as she knew they were married, she begged and borrowed everything, even camouflaging the tiny cake in paper and card to resemble 3 tiers, covered with tissue flowers and painted butterflies. "You were meant for me," Bren had sung to him on their wedding night. A shabby room in a backstreet hotel with a squeaky single bed and a rough grey-wool blanket had never been so romantic. Her beautiful voice sang out over the indigo sky, filled with sparkling stars and an iridescent crescent moon. Harry trudged back to the car, his normally upright shoulders drooping. "Well," said Susan. His daughter had been persuaded to drive him over to the home to find out about the practicalities of cleaning up Brenda's belongings, what the protocols were, but Harry had forgotten to ask about them. The shock of the woman's words that she had sat with his Bren had upset him. Why was it that she could, but he wasn't allowed to? He could feel the anger rising within him. "I didn't ask," said Harry. "Take me home, please." "Dad, I've wasted a whole morning." Harry put his hands up. "Stop it! Your mother asked very little of you, as I have, and now you can't give me a morning." He shook his head. "Sorry, Dad. Of course I wasn't thinking. I'll go and ask as we're here. Is that all right?" "Thank you," he replied. He looked at his daughter as she walked over to the front door. She was unlike her mother to look at, except in her walk. She had the same jaunty gait. Brenda had liked coordinating her wardrobe. Susan seemed to wear whatever came to hand, whether it matched or not. Certainly the plaid trousers she had on today argued with the patterned top. But she had inherited her mother's practical nature, and he knew Susan would take no prisoners in the conversation with the staff, just as she had done with the undertakers, organising what they were still permitted to arrange. "I don't think I like this surreal new world," Harry muttered to himself. "None of us do, Dad," Susan said, climbing back into the car. "Sorted. Roger and I can go in on Sunday afternoon." "Thank you." "I wish I could take you for lunch somewhere," he said, looking at the closed shops and pubs and restaurants with their lights off, all with white notices in their windows. "Soon, Dad. We will be able to do things again soon." Harry nodded. "I hope so." He was aware that he was living on borrowed time now, and he had not seen anyone other than through a window for over 3 months. This trip with Susan did not feel like freedom. He'd fought for it, but now he wondered, what had been the point? As they turned into the driveway of the bungalow, Harry noticed a wren sitting on the hedge. She was unusual for the area. Sanitising his hands for the umpteenth time and slipping off the mask Susan had insisted on him wearing even in the car, Harry gave Susan a wave from the kitchen window as she reversed out of the drive. She declined to stay for coffee in the garden. "Just you and I then, Jenny," Harry said to the tiny bird who had hopped onto a bush by the window. It was a hot day and Harry was tired. He walked around the block most days, despite the rules. He didn't want to lose the mobility he had, but he was too tired to do that today. He took his coffee and sandwich out to the garden. The wren came closer, hopping from the bush onto the branch of the miniature apple tree Brenda planted when they first moved to the bungalow. Jenny's tiny head bobbed up and down briefly as Harry studied her. He put out his hand. To his amazement, she hopped onto his palm and sat there, looking directly at him with her head tilted. Her brown feathers reminded him of Brenda's hair before it turned silver. "Well, you are coordinated, aren't you, little Jenny? Not like our Susan," Harry said softly, appreciating the green and puff feathers of her underbelly. The long pink legs reminded him of ballet dancers' tights. The bird's head appeared to bob in agreement. She flew back onto the branch of the tree, watching him as he finished his lunch. Brenda's legs were slim, he recalled. She had always regretted not being able to continue with ballet once the war started, but they had both enjoyed swing dancing and learning some of the more formal ballroom steps. Harry thought about the pale blue gown she had worn for the post-wedding celebration her mother gave. She had never looked more beautiful, well, except for the day he married her. They had both worn their uniforms. Brenda had carried a small bouquet of white blossom and lily of the valley, hastily put together an hour before they were due to be married. He looked around the garden. The apple tree had already bloomed, and the lily of the valley was also over. How much she had put into creating this beautiful oasis for them to enjoy. Sweet jasmine, fruit and vegetables, peonies and roses, the wild meadow at the bottom. Harry knew that his time was not yet up. Whatever else was going on in the world, as long as he had this space, he would always have his beloved Bren in his life, the way she had been, always would be in his mind and in his memory. "Thank you, Jenny," he said to the bird as he cleared away his lunch. And later, as he prepared for bed and looked out at the crescent moon and twinkling stars, he could see the silhouette of the little wren still sitting in the apple tree. "Good night, beautiful Bren," he said, humming. "You were meant for me." He turned himself into bed, more content than he could remember since Bren left. "Sweet dreams, my love," he heard her say. "Sweet dreams, Bren," he replied. Thank you for listening.